take the permissions of the executable that you're using. If you've ever been playing around with Chmod and you see the mysterious first octet, it's like if you ever want to change permissions, you set like 0755 or 0644, but you always set 0 because you don't want to mess with that first octet. SetUID and setGid are going to be part of that. So SetUID sets the process owner to the owner of that file. And similarly, setGid sets the process group to the group of that file. And generally, when you're dealing with this, it's because you want to take a executable and allow that to run as root regardless of the user running it. Very popular to be seen in sudo. And so this can be useful to enumerate, particularly if you're on a box that has custom developed software. And so if you're looking for it, the find utility is fairly great if you've never used find. And so you just type in a path and then list the permissions, 4,000 for setUID binaries and 2,000 for setGid binaries. And this is like, it sounds trivial and like it's not going to be useful, but your system now is only as secure as your root setUID and setGid binaries, which is a really, really big deal. If you've ever heard of GNU Screen, an alternative to Tmux terminal multiplexer, that was originally installed as of summer 2016, I think it was summer 2016, as a setUID binary root. And so an exploit via Screen allowed any local user to become root and completely attack, like own the system, just because Screen was setUID. Fairly big deal. And similarly, if you've ever played some war games where you SSH into a system, generally you're going to see setUID binaries here. If you're traversing through the levels as different users, they allow you to grant user access in a manner that allows you to exploit users. Fairly neat. So as an example, if we hit... we scripted all of our stuff because that way we don't have to type it wrong. And so if we go look at setUID, maybe. Yeah. So the find script is just the previous script that you saw on the PowerPoint, but it'll give you an idea of what kind of binaries can be running as setUID. And most of these you probably haven't seen, but things like su or sudo are definitely going to be setUID because they're giving you root access. And then like passwd, you have to be root to change the passwords in users, and so that's going to be available there as well. It also should be mentioned, Screen is no longer setUID. It is now installed as setGid utemp, which is not a security problem. But if you're ever working on an old system that hasn't been updated, it's worth checking Screen, because if Screen is installed setUID, odds are you can exploit it. And that module is publicly available on ExploitDB. And so it's trivial to run. It's a shell script and really, really easy to get root with. So now we move into something that's significantly more granular, which is the Linux capability system. And that was added in kernel 2.2, so it's actually a fairly old feature, although not a lot of people have really discussed it, at least with my experience. And it switches the traditional privilege model of like a root user and a non-root user, or a super user and a non-super user, into more granular capabilities. And this follows into the line of the idea of least privileges. And so you're allowed to assign binaries only the things they need to continue executing, which is a fairly neat idea. Question, explain setUID and setGid again. All right. And so setUID allows you to, I'll show you all the files. That'll make a lot more sense. So I found all the setUID binaries here, as you can see. So if I check the permissions of these files, sudo for instance, you can see that it's readable by no one and writable by no one, but it is owned by root, and the group is root, and it has an S here in the execute slot. That means it's been setUID. If you check, depending upon how your color scheme is, a lot of time these binaries show up red, which is fairly handy to identify them quickly. But whenever you run a process or run a binary, it takes the user of the person. It takes the user permissions of whoever's running it. And so here the username is CSG. And so if I were to run it, it would be running under the privileges of CSG. In the case of sudo, because it's setUID, it takes the privileges of the user root, which means that assuming sudo is written correctly, I can't do anything. But if I found an exploit in sudo, I can immediately become root because the process is root, regardless of who runs it. And so this makes permissions significantly more difficult, because if you don't realize one of your employees wrote a set UID binary that's root and it's terrible and like you can break it really easily, everyone can get root on your system fairly trivially if they can break the binary. So let's say for some reason I wanted to write a wrapper that, as root, could set user, like I could modify privileges in the password file, so I could change users there. So I write this really neat script that allows you to do that, and so it edits the passwd file. I can add users at will. Really, really handy. Anyone can run it because it's set UID. It gives me the flexibility of not caring about permissions. The set UID binary can literally do anything at once, and that means me as the developer doesn't have to care until I write it poorly, and then you break it very easily, and that is that. It's similar. If you don't know about capabilities, there's a lot of things that you can't do if you're not root. Writing raw packets to a socket, you cannot do, which you may need to do. And so you, instead of setting the capability to do that like you should, you set UID because you don't know what capabilities are, and then it's very easy to break. And back to capabilities. And capabilities, similarly to set UID binaries, only affect the executable, and so they affect the running process after the executable. These are not user-level capabilities.
We'll call it X and Y again. And this time, we're just going to return X times Y. If there's another Heath in here, that's awesome. You're probably a good-looking dude. Just saying. Okay, so now, if we wanted to print out that information, we could say print, multiply, and then we can give it 7 again if we want. Let's see if it's 49. Just take a look. Okay, and we got 49. We could also make a program called square root. Let's try that. So if we say define square root, let's give it one parameter of x. What if we return x to the exponent of 0.5? Okay, so now we say print square root of 64. Save this. And we get 8. We actually get a float of 8. And that's it on the function side. How are you feeling about the functions? Who was it asking? Was it Dodo? Probably take a drink and stall for a second.
I see y'all. When you listen to your boy right here, that's when everything started to go right for you. Come on, you know you're happy. I'm telling you, this thing really.
Yeah, if we do IDEs,
all you gotta do is catch that.
we'll get into those next week if we do another week.
Right. I'm sick of all this talking, girl. I told you, it's real simple.
But IDEs are very nice. IDEs nuts. Nice. I like it. All right. No complaints on the functions. We're going to go ahead and move on. So we're going to be talking about Boolean expressions next. So let's go ahead and add a new line here. Call it Boolean expressions, and then we'll also, in parentheses, I'll just put true or false. And note that true and false are capitalized. I should have a function for a new line. You're so smart. See, this is why White Rose gets paid the big bucks. I'll let you guys do that. You can write a function for your new line. Okay, so true or false? Note again that true or false is capitalized. So we're going to have a little print statement, because I like a little title here. We'll just call it, very simply, Boolean expressions. Okay, we're going to print out a bunch of bools here. So we'll call bool 1. We're just going to call it true. Okay? But what about bool 2? We'll make bool 2. What about 3 times, if I could type, 3 times 3 is equal to 9. That's also true. And notice what I did there. The 2 equals is an equal, right? If you have the 1 equal, we're talking about a variable. So make sure if you're doing an expression that you're setting it with equal equal. Okay, let's look at a couple more. Bool 3, let's just set that to false. And bool 4, let's call this 3 times 3 does not equal 9. So that's also false, right? And we can do a quick check. We could say print bool 1, bool 2, bool 3, bool 4. Okay. And we can also print out a type to check. Let's just say type. Let's hit Python 3. Okay, so as expected, true, true, false, false. So you see, even though we put in this equation here, it's not doing any math, it's checking for whether it's true or false. So it did come in as true, and this expression came in as false. And the thing I wanted to show you here was when we have this type becomes important, right? You can check what kind of type the class is. This class is a bool. But what if, put bool 5, and we said it was equal to true like this? Well, what does that become? I'm sure everybody gets this, right? Or bool 5. Becomes a string.